So welcome everybody to the second session of the Agile UX Virtual Summit here. Right now we have almost 1,500 people live, so very good turnout of folks here. And today we have, of course, our CEO, Marcin, who's going to be presenting a case study of actually building the UXPin design system. So him and a couple folks here went through the very difficult task of building out an enterprise level design system for our actual company. And he'll share some of the processes, the mistakes, and just overall best practices that he learned from that experience. So if you're in a similar situation, hopefully this will be insightful and useful to you. And yeah, with that being said, I'll pass it over to Marcin.
Thank you, Jerry, and welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time and giving me an opportunity to tell you all about my passion, design and development. I'm very happy that I have an opportunity to talk about design systems on an Agile UX Summit, and here's why. Agile, as a software development methodology, is all about being smart and working fast and working together with other people. And design systems, this is the tool emerging on the verge of design development that really helps us being more agile and being way smarter about the way we work and be way faster and delivering. We can deliver with design systems. We can deliver superior experience. So I'm just stoked to actually have an opportunity to tell you the story of how we at UXPin built our design system, or rather, we are still building it because, as I'm going to mention multiple times throughout the presentation, building a design system, it's a process. It never ends. It should never end. It's part of the way we build products. So let's get right to it. Short introduction. I'm a CEO and co-founder at UXPin. And because I'm just obnoxious and I love design, I'm also leading our design operations effort right now. My whole background is actually in UX design and psychology. I used to work as an UX designer and UX manager in the past. And naturally, apart from just running UXPin as a business, these days I'm focused on design development at scale, product strategy, and design operations. You might be wondering, what is UXPin? UXPin is the full stack UX design platform. The whole Agile UX process is in one place, from design systems through prototyping and documentation, and it's all collaborative. UXPin typically serves enterprises such as PayPal or Sapient. You can find amazing case studies on our website, but also we serve significant amount of mid-market customers and even smaller companies and freelancers. We have customers in over 150 countries. The company is, I would say, reasonably sized. So we're not a tiny startup anymore, but definitely still a small company. We have 70 people across 2 offices in Mountain View, California. This is exactly where I am today, and Gdańsk, Poland. So here's what we are going to do today. First of all, I'm going to tell you why building a design system makes sense, why this is worth the effort, why this is worth the scary thing, the change in the software development, and what kind of value does it provide. And then we are going to jump into our process, and I'm going to tell you how we actually kicked off the process of building a design system and where are we at today. And I'm going to show you some examples of our system in practice. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. This is the roadmap for the entire presentation. Just so you know, unfortunately, I cannot see your questions on chat, so I cannot see chat at all. But we'll get to all your questions, or as many as we can, at the end of the presentation. All right, ready? Excited? I need to now imagine over 1,500 people screaming yes, so you can do it on chat. But one way or another, we are starting. Okay, so UXPin is a company started by designers. So everything that happens at this company is actually started by the research. And with design systems, we actually started over a year ago with interviews with over 40 design leaders and practitioners from big companies. And we were very interested, what kind of problems do they see on the market, and what kind of problems do they face every single day and they consider to be extremely difficult. And there was one predominant pattern. companies, leaders, practitioners were all pointing at the impossibility of scale. So when you're building a design team and you're growing it over time, it's kind of, like this beautiful picture on the left from Unsplash. You're trying to just take step by step and get to the top floor. But in reality, quite often, we are just missing the staircase entirely. And how does it actually happen? So first of all, design became much more important in the past 10 years than ever before. And companies do invest a lot of money in design for a simple reason. The market of software especially is hyper-competitive. The cost of software development is going down, so companies invest more and more and to use this opportunity to build amazing businesses. But with all these expectations, there's a lot of pressure on the design team. So we as designers, we are asked to work faster, take over more projects, and build better experiences. And when we fail at doing that because we just get too much from the business part of the company, and the key, the solution is quite often to actually hire more designers. So we take new people on board, and then the problem actually starts. Because instead of actually delivering more of better quality and faster, we are starting to deliver less, and the experience is becoming gradually inconsistent. Because with every single new designer on board, we are adding something new and typically inconsistent to the product, unless we actually manage it properly. And then over time, the user happiness is decreasing, and teams become slower because the maintenance cost of the entire ecosystem is becoming enormous. So this is what we've heard from companies. And I gotta tell you, at this point, I remember I had a conversation with my co-founder, who's also a designer, and we realized that, wait a second, that actually applies to us as well. We started the company, with a tiny team, and over time, we started to grow the company, build up the whole design organization, but we didn't gain a lot of speed. And at least it wasn't proportional to the amount of effort and money spent on the team. And we started to think, why is that? And what does it mean for the design practice, and how that can be solved? And we figured out that the whole situation is very similar to something that was described by the second law of thermodynamics, if you remember that from school, from physics. So the second law of thermodynamics says that in any enclosed system, the entropy keeps increasing. So any enclosed system is just gradually becoming more and more chaotic. And this is exactly what we felt is happening in the design system process, or design process, or in our product as well. And we've heard that from many companies. Over time, the entropy is just increasing, and there is no simple solution to that, right? You cannot just multiply the number of people on your team and expect that the entropy will all of a sudden will disappear. So we asked ourselves a question: is design doomed? Can we actually scale design? Does design actually scale? And we asked these questions to all these design leaders and great practitioners from big companies. We also ran a survey with over 3,100 enterprises, and we asked the very question: what is the problem? How companies are solving it? And we learned that, of course, design is not doomed. Companies are figuring out the way to scale design. And we've heard amazing stories of building design systems as a way to scale design and development, actually, to scale entire software development process. So according to our survey, most companies are either building a design system right now, or they have some rudimentary form of a design system already in place. And all of that is to battle design inconsistencies and enable scale in the design process. So you have to be aware that this survey was run with enterprises, right? So companies who really experience this pain first, and they have enough capital to actually fight it with design systems. But there's something interesting here, because if big companies can build design systems and battle the issue of scale in the design, maybe smaller companies can do it as well. And we started to really explore this issue and think, how can we actually apply the notion of a design system? How can we build a design system at UXPin and use it inside of our process at a company of 70 people? So before we'll move to our design system, let's just talk a little bit about what is a design system and why does it matter. So my favorite definition comes from Nathan Curtis, who's I would call Nathan a prophet of design systems. Years ago, he wrote a book, Modular Web Design, which was basically describing the current situation in which companies are building modular systems used for scaling our practice. And Nathan Curtis pointed that design system is not really the result of the work. It's a framework of decisions and team behaviors across the product portfolio aimed at converging and building a cohesive experience. So it's really a process of achieving this consistent experience and building great experiences fast and collaboratively across the entire product portfolio. So it's the process, it's not the result. So what does design system contain? You know, as a process, what are we building over time, and why does it become part of our software development process? So we analyzed 39 publicly available design systems to understand what people are really putting into design systems, what is there, and why this is important. And as you can see, there's a lot of consistency inside of a design system, no surprise. Typically, you would see UI patterns, right? You would see implementation guidelines and documentation of these patterns, including either code snippets or code references that it does depend on the entire development environment at a given company. You would see so-called building blocks. You would see color palettes, icon libraries, typographic scales, space definition, right? So grid and layout, and not as often as all the other categories, but you'd see some brand guidelines and design principles. So there's a lot of consistency across the way people build design systems. So after analyzing that, we just decided to, well, you know, we have to get this organized, and we put this little structure in place to help us think about design systems. So 3 levels, 3 layers of information, 3 layers of elements of a design system that are typically used to fight for consistency and scalability of the design process. So first of all, the smallest ingredients, the ingredients that are used across every single thing that we design. So colors, typography, space, and different assets that are standard at a given organization. Level up, we have UI patterns, right? So, you know, you probably heard about atomic design, which is an interesting approach to architecture around UI patterns. We typically use a different approach, and we do use a different approach at UXPin, in which we are dividing all the patterns from the smallest of them, so elements, then components. Components consist of elements, modules consist of components, and then finally we have templates, which consist of modules. And then finally, we have something that goes across the entire system, the layer of rules. And you have design principles, which we actually love at UXPin. Implementation guidelines, editorial guidelines. There was a design system from MailChimp, which famously actually stated really clearly how their communication style looks like and how all the editorial aspects of communication look like, and they put that into their design system. So altogether, this is forming a framework in a way that grows over time and supports software development process. Okay, so you know, patterns, style guides, for all of us who are in the industry longer than a couple of years. We already heard that, right? I mean, like, it keeps coming back every couple of years, and it's actually, you know, the story is much older than we would think, right? So first of all, back in the 70s, Christopher Alexander started to work on patterns and pattern language for architecture. That's really laid foundation for just thinking about patterns in any design activity. In the early 90s, the so-called Gang of Four started to think about patterns in programming and how that can affect software development. Then, you know, I remember these days, back in 2006, the entire design world was super excited about Yahoo UI library, which was a very complex ecosystem of patterns, and surprisingly enough, companies all over the world were using it for prototyping. Then we got excited again with Bootstrap. And then just 2 years ago, Salesforce announced Lightning, which is an amazing design system, and really the new era of design systems begun, and it's different these days. And why this is different? So first of all, overall, the market is much more mature. Design matters more than ever. Digital matters more than ever. Experience matters more than ever, and the technology is truly ready. Finally, when we designers, we're talking about modularity in our work, developers are already there. And everything happened 2 years ago with JavaScript modules in ES5, and people started to discuss like modularity in JavaScript and really invest heavily in that. Facebook announced their library, React, and that's really became super popular and super helpful in development. So modularity that we need to build a design system is already present on the development end. And now the question is, how do we match that on the design end? So finally, we can get these two together and build consistent practice of building software based on design systems. So with all this research, with all these questions, and with some of these answers, we actually approach building a design system for ourselves at UXPin. And we're taking notes throughout the journey, and the journey, of course, continues. You can find some of them in pretty extensive posts on Medium that I published over the time, stories of our sprints, but I'm going to share some key insights. So first of all, how do you start building a design system? You start with just accepting the fact that design system is a process. It's not going to end. And this is a very important point, because if you're trying to get some internal funding for a design system, unfortunately, you cannot sell a finished thing, unfortunately or fortunately. So you cannot go to your stakeholders and say, I need 3 months of work and our design system is going to be ready. Because it's not going to be ready. You can set up the process that is going to become part of software development, and over time, design system is going to be more and more mature, and software development will gradually become faster, more efficient, and experience is going to be more consistent. But it shouldn't end, because this is the new way of building software rather than a deliverable that you can present to stakeholders at the end. So I always encourage people and companies to just make design system part of the way you're building product. That's it. So accepting this fact comes first. What comes second, we'll just jump a couple of slides. What comes second is forming a team. And of course, this is where trouble starts, because how do you build a team for something that new as building a design system? And we didn't have this problem at UXPin, because I was such a fan of this approach and I wanted to give it a try. And I talked to so many super smart design leaders, and I was just encouraged to give it a try in our process as well. So that secured our funding. But still, I couldn't just take people off their projects and ask them, now we are going to build a design system, and you still need to deliver all the things that you are working on. It doesn't work like that in any organization, right? Hopefully, it shouldn't be working like that in any organization. So what I did, I started alone, and I realized one thing. You can start building a design system with just a single person. You can absolutely do it, and perhaps you should. It's not like you can run the entire process forever with one person team, but you can definitely kick it off and prove some important things that are going to encourage others to join you, encourage the organization to give you some funding. And in our case, you can encourage people to take some extra time and focus on the system, and maybe reprioritize working on this sustainable design process, because we realized that this is necessary for us as an organization to build amazing product, and this is our goal, right? So if you cannot build the entire team, if you don't have funding for that, just start on your own, and it's enough to kick off this process. Once you have funding for the team, once you can actually build it, make sure that the team is multidisciplinary. So here's the thing. We're talking about design systems and design operations, and we are talking about design aspect of it, at least when it comes to the name of the entire thing. But here's something important. Although it's called design operations, and although this is called design system, this is not only run by designers. Design system emerges at the verge of design and development, and it requires work, attention of both designers and developers. This is bringing us truly together. Otherwise, you're just building a glorified style guide or glorified UI design pattern, not a true design system that will really help you deliver better experiences faster. So this aspect of multidisciplinary team is really, really important and something to remember. And then, like no matter if you're starting alone or you have some initial team, it's time to build an inventory. What is an inventory? So think about like a box with collection of all the pieces of interface that you have across your product portfolio. So think about all the buttons that you have in your product or across different product lines. Think about all the form fields. Think about all the tables. Think about all the content boxes, and just start collecting them and organizing in a structure. And here's what's going to happen. I bet you when you start collecting all these pieces of interface across all your products, you're going to notice some pretty drastic inconsistencies. And this is something that can be used to actually get the funding. Because it's pretty easy to prove that if you have 12 kinds of buttons, they all are represented by different pieces of code. And maybe this is not slowing down the entire product just yet, but it's definitely slowing down product development. And there's plenty of redundant code that should not exist in the first place, and now it has to be maintained by the team. And button is a simple example, but it gets more complicated with more complex patterns, right? So inventory is an amazing tool that you can use to actually prove the need for a design system and the need for standardization. Now, there are two kinds of inventories. So first of all, there's an inventory that is just done with screenshots. Just go through your product, go through all the websites or mobile apps actually on production servers or on your phone, and just take screenshots of all the pieces of interface and just put it together in a small presentation and you're good to go. That's one way to do it. We decided to do it in a different way at UXPin. We actually collected all the patterns directly from design files, from our projects in UXPin, from our projects in Sketch, because we wanted to have something actionable if we decide to keep a pattern, and we wanted to have a collection of something that we can edit and affect our designs. So let's take a look at the inventory, shall we? So let me just switch really quick to my browser. And here it is, our design inventory. Hope you can see that. Jerry, if my screen is not visible right now, let me know, okay? But it should be visible.
Yeah.
So this is our, okay, perfect. So this is our true interface inventory, and this is going to be pretty extensive. So we actually started by analyzing all the color variables available everywhere in our code. And this is what we found. All the colors used across different pieces of UXPin, our marketing pages, and all the different parts of the tool. As you can see, there's a lot of them, and every single one is represented by a different variable in less. We use as a CSS preprocessor, we use less. And naming on all these variables is getting pretty weird, like color semi-light gray. That doesn't mean anything to a developer who's going to encounter that. And we can clearly see that what was going on is that designers were just eyeballing shades of gray and just putting new shades into their projects, and then developers were just taking that and building new variables for that, putting that into our less files, and here we go. Sometime later, we have hundreds of colors, hundreds of variables, and plenty of similar colors, and no system in that. So when we were working on this inventory, I put like a little bit story, like a journal on the side for our team to have access to. And you have some stats. There was 62 shades of gray across all of our pieces of product. Some of that is legacy, to be fair to the team, but this still existed in the code base. So that was the first step, just collecting all these colors. Tell you about our color palette a little bit more and a little bit later. But we did the same thing for our typography. As you can see, we collected all the text styles from across UXPin. And then we started to do the very same thing for our patterns, for our patterns. So let's take a look at buttons. So all the buttons use a UXPin everywhere across the portfolio of products, right? So we collected them in one place. And this is basically it. This is inventory. One important thing to remember, we actually use the architecture that existed in our code base, because our developers for years now were doing an amazing job with modularity of CSS and JavaScript as well. So we had the opportunity to actually use, like elements that exist in code and components and modules. All of that was ready, but we had to recreate or find representation on the design end. So that was the main task. So we built this inventory. Let me now switch back to my presentation really quick. And what happened next with the inventory? So after showing this inventory to the team, I got people who were very interested in working with me on the system, because as an organization, we started to realize that this is a true challenge. Like, it's slowing us down. We can build better and faster and be more together in the process between designers and developers. So that was a big realization coming from just a simple exercise of building an interface inventory. And I'm hearing from a lot of companies when this inventory piece is actually used to attract some funding, to get stakeholder support, to get like just a team buy-in at first. So a very efficient tool, highly recommended for all of you to give it a try and just create this inventory for your own products. Okay, what was the next step? After we got the inventory in place and we realized that we have problems with consistency in the interface, we started to think about how to actually make some real standards and make them live in the system. So the first step on this whole path to hopefully a success was organizing our color palette, because as you could see, we had a pretty significant problem with colors. So we had this whole inventory. What we needed to do next is actually to find out which colors should stay in the system and which shouldn't stay in the system. And that was a whole another task. So our senior UI architect, Bartosz, went ahead, checked the entire code base again, and started to take a note of how often a particular color actually appears in code. And he also found multiple colors that didn't have any variables. So we found that legacy code as well. And we started to he started to take notes and comments in UXPin on our inventory. So we could see, like, there's a shade of gray that appears 12 times, and there's another one which appears only once, and they're very similar. It's pretty clear which one is the correct one, which one is the one that actually designer wanted to use. So we went through this entire exercise and we collected all the colors together with stats. I built a spreadsheet, so pretty old school, but that's the easy way to approach it. I built this spreadsheet with all the colors, and we started to look for matches. And we had at first only a dream and then a method of actually building, first of all, base colors, so our primary colors, and then using particular less functions to derive the entire palette. So we started to think, okay, if we want to have particular shades of gray, it's actually better than make an arbitrary decision. It's better to use less functions and find out, what is the 25% lighter version of this particular shade of gray, which is our primary color. So we use these functions to build a functional palette of colors. Took us some time. It was pretty difficult to just put it together and create a consistent palette of colors, and also get a buy-in of all of our designers. That was quite a challenge, to be honest. Took us some time to explain why this matters, and we had an important realization at that point in time, in which we realized that as design operations team, because this is how we started to call ourselves, we serve the rest of the company, which means that whatever we put together, no matter if it's like super logical and super smart, it actually needs to be accepted by the entire team, by the entire organization. Because design system, if it's not used by the team, is dead, right? It doesn't play any role. So couple of iterations on our color palette, and we put together a whole palette based on an interesting naming convention, which our team really liked. So naming is extremely hard in design systems. It's one of the fundamental challenges because you have to put together a naming convention that is actually accepted by the team and very clear and human readable. So after deliberating for the whole 2 sprints, actually, so 2 weeks in our case, we figured out that first of all, the less variables are going to use a very simple pattern with suffixes. So if something is a base color, a base property is going to have a base suffix. So like blue base is our main shade of blue. Silver base is our main shade of light gray. Like violet base is our violet. You get where I'm heading with that. And then for all the secondary, for all the secondary colors, secondary properties, and accents, we're putting the function used to actually derive a particular color right to the name. So our 15% lighter shade of blue would be called blue lighten 15. And why this is important? Because we want developers to have a conversation with the designers that is actually based on the same naming pattern. And it's much easier to say like, okay, we need this shade of blue being 20% lighter. And the developer doesn't need to go to any kind of tool and figure out what color is that. He can just say, okay, we have that color in our system. It's called blue lighten 20, right? So naming convention is we actually were thinking about building something that can be used in a conversation. And this is it. This is our final color palette that we are using in UXPin. And to be honest, we're still adding and removing to it. Just based on our new projects, we are still trying to find the best possible version. But this is the approach starts to be used by the team. And now we have the process in place, right? We keep going with all of our colors. So we started with colors, but we did the same thing for typography, very similar process. We started with the inventory, checked what's going on there, and tried to build a consistent typographic scale, which matches mixing in less. It should be called mixing without the G. Autocorrection did a trick on me here. Apologize. Sorry for that. But you can get a sense. So there's a mixin in our less files called headline 1, and calling it from less files is going to render exactly the headline that we have here on the left. And so it goes throughout our scale. And we have our task was simple because we only use one font inside of the tool, which is Proxima Nova. So we did the same thing for typography. And then we started to have another problem, which is how do you make it available, right? So there's one thing just to document it. There's another thing to put it in code. And finally, if you want to have, and you should want to have, a super consistent experience for users, you have to make it available to designers. And that was a completely new challenge for us because we started to think, okay, what do we do? How do you put that into tools of your design team? And to battle this, let me switch really quick to UXPin. I'll show you how all of that I described exists in the system. So to deliver all the standards to team and keep them consistent, keep all the team in sync, when we create design system libraries, which are available for Sketch and for UXPin. We're actually launching a final version today. That was available until now in an early access program, but as for now, you can just have it on your accounts. And we really deeply cared about this whole problem because we didn't want people to go when they want to change color on the heading here. We didn't want them to go to an external documentation, right? We just wanted to get them to have the whole standard, the whole system available right in the tool, right? So they can choose all the colors from here. We have our entire color palette and just change the color, right? If there's a change in text style, they can just do that and it's going to work perfectly, right? So we build all of that to make design system available and actionable for companies, because that's a big issue. If design system exists as an external documentation and reference document, it's not live, it's dead. And then the documentation should really stay in sync with this, because this is the living environment in which all the styles are being put together. Okay, so this is the whole concept of making the system available. We'll talk about it more in a couple of minutes. So we got that. Okay, so after this step, we did the same thing for our icons. basic properties, we put together all the building blocks of the design system. If you remember the first layer, and we implemented that in design systems libraries in UXPin. We implemented that on Coden. There's still a lot of refactoring that we have to go for older parts of UXPin, but at least we have this living standard in place. But there's one thing to keep in mind when you're approaching building a design system. And again, I need to emphasize that design system exists on the verge of design development. This is not pure design exercise. And when I'm saying that, I really mean that design and code inside of a design system, they need to go arm in arm. So when we approached working on our icons, I had to go in and do some tests of performance for different ways you can actually implement icons library inside of a system for React.js development environment. And I just built different ways of implementing icons. I ran some tests so we can have some objective data about which approach to use and implement, and then spread across UXPin. And for design operations teams, I would strongly suggest involving designers who understand code, so you can appreciate the whole effort put from the other side. It's not a necessity, right? I've heard about, and I talked to many design operations teams that doesn't have this coding designers notion and coding designers on their team. I think it makes the whole job much easier. So if you can do it, place the coding designers on your design operations team. If you cannot, you need to just make your collaboration with developers really strong. In our case, all of the designers working on our design systems, they can actually code, right? So I think it's making our work faster, and that will be my recommendation if you can do it. Okay, so we put together icons. And then after icons, after basic properties of all radiuses and all of that, once we have that in our system, that was the biggest challenge, which is never going to end, which is standardizing our actual patterns. And there's one simple thing that you have to remember: start small. So it's not about going throughout the entire product and building every single pattern right from scratch and documenting it precisely. It's rather just a process in which sprint after sprint, you take a bunch of elements, or even a single element, whatever you can do, right? And you just improve it and ship it to the team so they can use it, right? That's the whole thing. You have to start small, be patient, because this is process. This is the new way of actually building your product. So in our case, we just started with buttons. That was the first thing that we approached in our design system. And we started really small with just one kind of a button first, and then we started to extend our approach. And sprint after sprint, we started to standardize our buttons. And let me show you now our buttons and our entire design system, so you can get a peek at something that we put together, something that we actually use at UXPin across all of our new projects. And I assure you, it's making software development process so fast, so much easier, and experience is so much more consistent. This is just a mind-blowing change in the entire process. So let's leave the presentation behind. And we are back to the project. So first, I want to show you our patterns that we have in the system. So as I mentioned, all the pieces of the design system actually live inside of the design tools in Sketch and UXPin, two tools that we use at the company. And when our designers are working on a new thing, like it could be a change to this properties panel. This is artificial, I'm not going to lie. I drew that for the sake of this presentation, right? But just represent the real process. They can just drag and drop patterns, right? These patterns are actually symbols, so they stay in sync, and same story would go in Sketch. There would be Sketch symbols. So they stay in sync across all the accounts, right, or all the Sketch instances across the team. So the team has one source of truth. So they can build much faster, and something that we notice is that once you have patterns available, less people are prone to actually build their own versions, because this is just this is just easier. You can just drag and drop and you have it, right? And patterns in the UXPin design system are interactive, so we're putting hovers and all the states inside, which you can see here, right? There's a hover state to this button, because we just want to make sure that our developers have access to all the information about every single pattern. So building is really fast, and you can see that we have our logos, we have logos of our customers, we have approved screenshots for marketing communication, and we have all of our icons, which is such a pain to keep these icons somewhere else, like in Dropbox or Google Drive. So finally, we have them inside of our tool, so we can use them across our projects. Nobody needs to look for any icons. They're there, they're searched, everything works nice. Textiles are here, colors are here, right? Now, this is not it, right? So the library is on its own, it's not a system, because we are missing the entire part of the actual guidelines, how to use that, how to implement it, and what about the connection with code, right? So this library stays in sync with our real design system. And it's actually, whenever you change a color or any pattern in the library, it's going to be reflected in this documentation. So there's a lot of information, like description of all the variables in less, and some of them were tested, like pairs of colors were tested for accessibility purposes. That's available in our system. So our designers can understand, do not put silver base as a text on blue base, because this is not going to pass the test. You gotta go with white, and we have all this information here in the system, so it's fully documented. So if we would all of a sudden change our gray base to, let's say, like 666, we'll just start in the library inside of our design tools, either Sketch or UXPin, and that will be reflected automatically in the system. So it's just, it stays in sync. So we have all the colors, of course, but then, we have all of our text styles, and again, there's a documentation, like if you want to, as a developer, if you want to use this headline, you need to go with this mix, and you can pass a color to it, and it's going to render correctly. And all the assets, and then let's just go through that. Lots of icons, and then finally we have our patterns, right? So there's a lot of documentation here, and there's documentation added to every pattern. A very important point, right? So documentation needs to be here because we want developer to know how to implement this button without searching through past code. We would just want them to know, like, okay, I want to have this button. This is a piece of JSX, right? It needs to have this particular properties, and this is going to render perfectly every single time. And if you want to assign action, you're just passing a function, a callback to the button, and that's it, right? So this is the implementation documentation, because what we really care about here is to make this design system actionable, not only for designers, but also for developers. But right now you could say, like, well, wait a second, this is a static documentation. Like, you put it into documentation and maybe design assets stay in sync, but what about the development part? So let me show you this in action. So we dropped a couple of patterns from our patterns library represented in the design system onto the canvas. Now, when we are sending this to developers, here's what's happening. We are just generating the UXPin preview. You can just pass this link to your development team. They get the project, right? They can enter the spec mode, with all the CSS properties. But as we know, few big companies actually put CSS together for every single new implementation. We deliver that. It's mostly for smaller companies. But if they click on a particular button, they get the specification straight from the design system, right? So this documentation follows every implementation. So it's putting it right once into your system, but every single time you're using it, it actually gets the information from the design system and pushes together for developers automatically. So the documentation for developers is always there, always available. All the elements can be interactive, and they have states, like hovers, and this is pretty easy, right? We can get here, you have all the documentation available, and again, all the states. So this is making this whole documentation more actionable, because developers, without us, redlining on a side or sending them links to a design system or telling them this button has this name in the system and here's the documentation, they actually get it from all the projects that they're working on. And it's all automatic, right? They get the information that they need to implement a particular pattern. And altogether, this is just making this design system fully actionable, and it keeps design and development in sync, and it let us work faster, keep the consistency intact, and we started to fix inconsistencies in our own product with design system. Been using that for a while, and it's it's a game changer for us as a process. Like just building this design system, so building this thing, and then using this documentation to make the communication with developers faster and more focused on the actual thing that they need. It's just completely changed our design process, and I love it. I think this is the future of building products, and I highly encourage you to start building your design system today, because as I mentioned, there's nothing that you need to wait for. If you're a single developer of a designer on your team, you can just start with the design inventory, put some basic standards in place, and work with the team to make it part of your process, because design systems is a dynamic process. It's not just the outcome. With that, I'm done. I think I'm right on time, or a minute or two late. And I'm looking forward to hear your questions. Thank you so much for your attention.
Great, thanks, Marcin. And before we dive into the questions, just another quick reminder here that if you're interested, we do have a Slack community for designers, developers, PMs. And if you have more than 3 years of experience working on products, then we encourage you to apply for product tribes. And with that being said, we will go ahead and launch a poll here, which we same poll as we did last time, because I know we've got some new folks here. And while we get into the poll, let's dive into some of the questions. We have a lot of questions here, so we'll try to get through as many as we can. All right, so the first question actually is from, let's see, here we go. The first question is a pretty common one, which is, in your opinion, what is the difference between a style guide, a pattern library, and a design system?
Oh, sure. So first of all, like style guide and the pattern library is typically static, meaning that a team devotes a particular amount of time to build it to reflect the current state of a project or product, and it's being shipped and then supposed to be used by the team. I built it in the past, never worked, right? Design system is the process, so you're committing to an ongoing activity that is going to always reflect the truth of about the product, right? Then also worth mentioning is that design system is it's going much deeper, right? So style guide typically would stay design style guide, right? Apart from like front end, unlike front end style guides, design style guide would just stay on the surface, like describe all the visual aspects of the experience and document them. Pattern library would typically stay on the design end of things, would actually document patterns used by designers. Now, design system is going deeper because it's going towards the code, right? So as you can see, even in our design system, we not only have colors like we would have in a style guide. All these names are actually meaningful for our team, right? If they want to implement our most prevalent shade of blue, they will just go with blue base, right? They just need to use this variable, and this is documented. So design system, it's a living thing. It's always changing. It's part of the process and the way we're building products. And it's going much deeper and closer to code than any other approach in the past, such as style guide or design patterns library.
Gotcha. And the next question we have here is, let's take a look here.
There's 80 questions?
Yep, we've got a lot of good questions here.
Nice.
Yeah, somebody was just curious, what is the difference between the interface inventory and this concept of a design system?
So interface inventory is what you have today, including all the inconsistencies that you might have across your products, right? So for example, have it still open, so let me show that. Right, so this is the inventory of all the colors across UXPin products, right? And there is no system here. It was just growing over the past 5 years, right? Now, it used to reflect the truth about UXPin, about our product. Like all these colors, and most of them were used somewhere in the interface. And then design system is taking everything that exists and organizing it, right? So from all this chaos that we had over there, we have a systematic palette of colors, right? So, and also from like all the buttons that we had in the inventory, we have this organized set of document buttons that we use from now on in the across UXPin products, right? So the difference is that inventory describes the state of things before you're actually committing to building a design system, and then once you start building a design system, everything that is in the system reflects the truth about product or the state to which you aspire. I wish I could say that everything that is in the system is actually the truth about the product, but quite often it's true to a part of the product, and to the rest of that, to spreading this, we are just aspiring. You know, like we are building a beautiful table pattern. You implement it in one product, but you have another 10. It's going to take some time, but at least this is the new standard in place, right? So it's the difference between consistent past and consistent future, you could say.
Right, gotcha. And the next question here is, how is this design system kept in sync? So, for instance, with our design system, is there a manual process, or is there any sort of automation that helps to build the library, the documentation, and make sure everything is updated?
This whole thing is automatic, right? So we started from here, right? So we started to build the palette. We started to just put together the colors, and this is, as you can see, there's a link here to this exact design system. It's just staying in close sync. So if we would change one of these colors or add another one, which I guess we can do, we can just mess for a second, just for the sake of the presentation. Hope the team is not going to kill me. But look, we'll just keep this thing here, right? We've added the system. I'm on the design operations team, so I'm in charge of this whole library. Go back to our system. We just need to refresh it. Let's go to our colors. I think we have modified mint, but let's give it a try. See if it's there already. Oh, there you go. And you have the new color here, right? And you know, it's not really mint, but you get the story. So it's stay in sync always, right? And so if you change the name, you know, like mint weird 50, that's going to be reflected in the system as well in a couple of seconds. And it works exactly like that for textiles, for assets, for UI patterns. So this is keeping the team in sync. So you can update the system without, you know, like building a separate documentation on a website, right? And keeping that in sync. It's staying in sync with the assets that you like, that the actual designers use in the process of building product. That's pretty much it. Let me just make sure that I delete this color. But hopefully that was helpful. Or whoever asked this question to understand how these things are kept in sync. It's all automatic. And this documentation is manual, right? You need to add it. You need to describe what you have in the system. But at least the content, all of that is going right from Sketch or from UXPin into this documentation. I wish I could show you that right now from scratch in a completely new library, but we already have our systems. But it basically takes 2 clicks, and you just generate this whole thing based on the library that you have in Sketch or UXPin.
Gotcha. And oh man, we have a lot of questions here. So.
Sweet. Oh, 1.2.
Yeah, a lot of questions. I'm getting through some of these right now from before. Mm-hmm. And so the next question is actually from Patricia, and she's wondering how is this different? So in her case, she's using Brand AI and Sketch mm-hmm. together. And she's wondering how our approach is different, or maybe she's wondering if there's anything better with our approach, and basically how we communicate with Sketch in the system that we built.
Yeah, so there's multiple things. So first of all, it's also synced with if you UXPin. So let's imagine that these patterns are coming from Sketch. You can make it them interactive in UXPin, right? So that's one thing. You can put together documentation to every single pattern. And then there's this whole magical concept of actually using this documentation from the system, from the design system, in your projects, and that that's not offered by anybody on the market, but we believe this is the crucial thing. We make design systems actionable, right? So as I mentioned before, you have a pattern in the system, you added the documentation to your system, developers are getting a project, documentation is right there, right, waiting for them with all the information that they need and all the interactive states. So this is the main thing. It's not a static documentation, it's an actionable thing that is used across all your projects. And if you have design system in Sketch and you're using Sketch symbols to build the system, then still the documentation would follow implementation of the system and would give you all this documentation from the system inside of the project. So I recommend you give it a try, and hopefully you're going to enjoy it. This is also the first release of UXPin design systems product. So there's going to be more good stuff coming up really soon. So lots of exciting things around systems.
Gotcha. And the next one, the question here is, so after a design system is created and implemented, who should test the components that are released to production to make sure that's in sync with the design system? Is there some sort of QA team?
Right.
Team?
Yes, exactly. So yeah, so we have a QA team which is helping with this test. We also do it ourselves. So we're constantly testing after implementation. We are helping QAs with tests. Unfortunately, right now there's not an easy way around it. We are actually thinking about making some of this tests automatic, so we can have more control over the deployment of components from the system, but we are not quite there yet. So right now, for us, at least for our implementation, this is a manual process of actually testing what's happening to all of our components and all of our colors. We just, like when we were, for example, changing the colors in UXPin after introducing the new palette, the whole team working on the system and our QA engineers, we just had to go through the entire product and just make sure that everything is intact and everything works great. So right now, manual, so nothing necessarily, giving us a lot of thrill and excitement, but it's a necessary step. Very good question. A few people ask about QA in terms of design system, but this is a necessary thing.
Right. And the next question here is about it's really about the timeline for when we built our design system. Somebody here had a series of really interesting and detailed questions. So to date, how long has it taken us to build our own design system? How many people were involved, and who did we all involve in that process? So basically, how many people, how many hours to build out our own design system?
Hours, not sure. But when it comes to when did we start to work on our color palette, and then how did we move forward, I believe the color palette was finalized in February, I'm gonna say. And back then, there was 3 people working on the system. Right now, we have 4 people working on the system, and we are hoping to have 5 soon because we still work faster on implementing all the components and standardizing them. So the team is changing. But here's the thing, as I mentioned, like UXPin is a company of 70 people. So none of us can just devote the entire time to UXPin. So we are kind of like sharing time with other stuff, right? And how do we manage that? We run weekly sprints. So that gives us more control over the process. And then we are always checking like, what's the time commitment that I can actually have, that I can contribute this particular sprint to design operations. And then we are deciding based on the sum of the time commitment that we have on the team, what we can deliver, right? And sometimes this is just, checking the possibility of implementing a new pattern, like updating another piece of interface with a new color palette, right? That depends on what we can take. This is not typical, right? So like if you are familiar with what Airbnb does with their design operations, or Salesforce, there are completely separate teams responsible for that. But at our scale, we have to share time. Who is on the team? Senior designers who can code, and developers. And just of recently, our CTO even joined the team, so he can control more of a code quality part, or help the team control the code quality part. So keeping it multidisciplinary and focused on this collaboration between developers and designers.
Got it. And we had a couple questions here from people who use Sketch, and they were curious with the design systems tool in UXPin. So not asking about obviously internal design system, but the tool that we use. How can they import their Sketch libraries in there?
Oh yeah. Well, like I'm not using Sketch, unfortunately, so I can't show you that. But here's the thing. Looks exactly. Where is it? Oh, here. Looks exactly like that. So the Sketch plugin, which I believe we just released to the entire market, looks like this thing, and you're just basically adding symbols to the library, and after you're logged into UXPin, it's going to be shared across all the accounts assigned to UXPin across your organization, right? So let's say that there's 10 designers. Every single one has its own, her own or his own sketch, and then we are using UXPin Design Systems plugin. So you're adding a symbol, and then you would have an opportunity to actually sync this symbol that you added with the to the system and with the rest of your team. It's very straightforward. You can download the plugin. I think it's available already inside of the tool, and give it a try. It's all based on Sketch symbols. Stays in sync really nicely. It doesn't need any external cloud. It's all like going to UXPin cloud, and it just works great. And all the colors can be synced as well, and all the assets. So it's pretty much it. It looks identical to what we have here.
Gotcha. And the next one is this is actually a really, really interesting question. So how do you decide that a certain part of design system is sort of finished for that time being? So the person asking this is, his company has tried to create a design system a few times already, but they always get caught up knowing when there's enough to actually deploy versus when they need to continue working and iterating on it.
Oh, that's a fascinating question. So so first of all, something that I should have mentioned during the presentation is that in our case, and I've heard similar stories from many companies, we actually started with a piece of product that we decided to use as a standard. So it wasn't that we didn't create design system from scratch and then completely redesign the product. On the contrary, this is the UXPin design and prototyping editor, right? And apart from the design system piece, this is the newest part of UXPin. And when we approached building a design system, we just made a decision, okay, whatever is here is going to be used as a standard unless there are inconsistencies already inside of it, right? So then we are going to change it. And with that, it meant that we have to document patterns, like this, like the tab navigation, and then apply it in different parts of UXPin or in different parts of UXPin editor that didn't have this navigation and should have, right? So that started the process. It's drastically different than efforts of some of the companies which are, they're in need of redesigning everything with a completely new design system built right from scratch. I've never done it, so I cannot really comment on building from scratch. This concept gives me a strong anxiety because it sounds like a very static approach to design systems. So I'm not a fan, although I've never tried it, so I might change opinion in the future. But for us, it started with this kind of almost like a standard for UXPin UI. Now, when particular piece of the system is ready, so some of parts of the system are naturally that this is complete, or it's not complete, but it's ready for deployment. Like with colors, what we had to do, we had to make sure that we covered every single piece of the interface. Every single old variable is going to be matched or replaced by a new variable, which was a lot of work. But that has to be done, right? So we understood, what do we need to implement this new color palette based on our existing back then code base. Now, it doesn't mean that this is finished. Like, as I mentioned, we are still adding or removing from the color palette. We're optimizing it. We're changing things because the design system is a living thing. So so that's the thing with all the building blocks. You know that you're ready to implement when you covered everything that you had to cover inside of your product. With patterns, that's a more difficult thing. So first of all, I recommend just taking an element after an element, right? So like this button would be one thing, and then you're asking yourself the question, okay, I'm like, how do we actually going to build this component on the code end, right? What kind? This is a React.js component. What kind of properties are going to be passed? What do we need to use this component for inside of the interface? And that's, of course, done by developers, and they need to go through this whole exercise of making sure that implementing this thing is not going to break anything, but it's going to set a standard for every single set grid button in the future, right? And then, like, if you just start that small, it's much easier to decide, like, okay, I'm implementing this. This is coming up. Then, like, just trying to go with all the buttons. So that's why I find it really important to understand that design system is a process. You just run it as any agile process. You run it in sprints, and you deliver something at the end of every sprint, right? So all these old concepts of agile development can be, in my opinion, should be applied to building a design system. It was a long answer. Hopefully, I answered the question.
Yeah, no, that was great. And since we are coming up on the end of the hour, we will have to say that was the last question, but the conversation continues over on Product Tribes. And so if you have more than 3 years of experience, we encourage that you apply to join our Slack community of 3,500 folks who work in design, engineering, and product management. Here's a link again for that. And with that being said, thank you everybody for joining the session here today. We hope that this was informative in terms of some of the hurdles and specific challenges for building a design system. And of course, if you are curious in trying to use UXPin for that purpose, you can also check out just our site as well. And there's resources, and we also have a free trial if you're interested in that. Our next session here is actually going to be a product demo of the design systems that Marcin kind of gave a quick overview here on. So our lunchtime sort of session here is going to be with Lindsay, and that'll be starting in just a few minutes, where we'll go through some of the high-level functionalities of design systems, and we should be set there. Hope to see you all there in a few minutes. All of the slides and the recording will be sent to you guys later in the week here as a batch email. And thanks so much for joining. We had almost 1,800 people here at one point, so it was a very large turnout, and great questions as well. And hope to see you all throughout the week. We've got some great afternoon sessions also. So yeah,
thank you so much.
Yeah, take care, everybody.